You know, there's something peculiar that happens when you begin to see through the games you've been playing. When you start to recognize the masks you've been wearing, the roles you've been performing, the stories you've been telling yourself about who you are. And it's not at all like the spiritual books describe it. It's not this blissful awakening where angels sing and everything suddenly makes sense. No, no. It's more like, well, it's more like outgrowing a skin that you thought was you. And here's the really interesting part. It hurts. Not in the way a wound hurts, but in the way it hurts when you're growing too fast as a child and your bones ache. There's this strange discomfort, this unsettling sensation of not quite fitting into the shape you used to occupy so comfortably. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it becomes to maintain an image of yourself once you've seen that it's just an image? It's like being in a play where you suddenly realize you're acting, but everyone else is still convinced it's real life. And you have to keep performing because, well, what else are you going to do? Walk off the stage? But every word feels hollow. Every gesture feels rehearsed. You're caught between two worlds, the world where you knew who you were and this new territory where you haven't the faintest idea. Now, most people never face this particular brand of discomfort because they never question the character they're playing. They are, let's say, an accountant, and that's that. They wake up, they account, they go to bed. Very tidy, very manageable. The costume fits, the lines are memorized, and the other actors in their life confirm the role. Your spouse treats you like an accountant. Your friends see you as an accountant. Even your own mirror seems to reflect back this accountant self. And so the illusion holds. But then something happens. Maybe you start reading books that suggest you're not quite what you thought you were. Maybe you have an experience, meditation, perhaps, or some moment of clarity where the ordinary becomes suddenly transparent and you see it, just for a flash, that there's no accountant. There never was. There's just this happening, this flowing, this eternal, now pretending, very convincingly, to be a separate person named whatever your name is, doing accounting. And once you've seen it, you can't quite unsee it. Oh, you can pretend you didn't see it. You can go back to the costume, pick up the script, hit your marks. But there's this nagging awareness now, like a pebble in your shoe. The old identity doesn't quite fit anymore. It's too small, too constrictive, too obviously false. This is where the pain comes in. Because you see, your entire life has been organized around this character you thought you were. Your relationships, your career, your habits, your preferences, your opinions, all of it built on this foundation of I am this particular person with this particular history and these particular characteristics. And now the foundation is crumbling, and you're standing there watching the whole architecture of your life wobble. The people around you, they sense something's changed. You're not playing the game quite right anymore. Your spouse asks, "What's wrong with you lately?" And you haven't got an answer because how do you explain that you've discovered you don't exist in the way you thought you did? Your friends find you less reliable, less predictable. You used to have such strong opinions about things, and now everything seems rather provisional, rather fluid, rather up for question. And here's what makes it especially uncomfortable. Part of you desperately wants to go back. There's this voice that says, "This is ridiculous. You're an accountant. You have a mortgage. You have responsibilities. Stop this philosophical nonsense and get back to being who you were." And you might even try. You might throw yourself back into the role with renewed vigor, hoping that enthusiasm will restore the old conviction. But it doesn't work. Once you've tasted that freedom, that spaciousness of not being anyone in particular, the cage feels smaller than ever. You see, the old identity served a function. It protected you. It gave you a sense of stability in a wildly unstable universe. It allowed you to predict how you'd behave, what you'd think, what you'd want. It was your security blanket. your armor, your script for navigating the chaos of existence, and now you're being asked to walk around naked, so to speak, to move through the world without that protective shell. And naturally, this is terrifying. But let me tell you what's really happening. Because this pain, this discomfort, this feeling of being stretched beyond your old boundaries, it's not a problem. It's the growing pain of consciousness recognizing itself. You're not losing yourself. You're losing the caricature of yourself. The limited, conditioned, societally approved version that was always too small for what you actually are. Think of it this way. Imagine a wave that has spent its entire existence believing it's separate from the ocean. It has a name. Let's call it Walter the Wave. Walter has worked very hard to be a good wave. He's developed a particular shape, a particular size, a particular way of moving. He's quite proud of being Walter. Then one day, Walter has this unsettling realization, good grief, I'm not separate from the ocean at all. I'm just ocean, temporarily waving. Now, this is extraordinary news for Walter. It means he's not just this small, temporary, fragile thing that will soon crash on the shore and disappear. He's the entire ocean. But it's also rather devastating news for Walter, because it means Walter doesn't exist. Not really. Not in the way he thought he did. So Walter goes through this period of confusion. Is he Walter or is he ocean? Should he keep being Walter or should he let Walter go? And it hurts because Walter was his whole identity, his whole sense of self, his whole world. This is precisely what happens when you begin to see through your own conditioning. You're Walter the Wave, discovering your ocean, and the pain comes from that transition, that gap between what you thought you were and what you're discovering you are. The tricky part is that you can't go back, but you can't quite go forward either. Not in one leap. The old identity crumbles slowly, piece by piece. One day you realize you don't actually believe in the political opinions you've been defending for years. They were just part of the costume. Another day you find you can't maintain the anger you always felt toward your father. The story you told yourself about that relationship starts to dissolve. Then the career ambitions that drove you for decades suddenly seem hollow. The image you projected on social media feels increasingly false. The persona you performed at parties becomes exhausting to maintain. It's like you're being deconstructed. And deconstruction, let me tell you, is not a comfortable process. Nobody warns you about this part. The spiritual books talk about enlightenment, awakening, liberation. They make it sound rather pleasant. But they skip over this messy middle phase, where you're not quite your old self anymore, but you haven't fully realized your new nature either. You're in limbo. In no man's land, in the gap between the trapeze bars, and the people in your life, they don't know what to make of you. You're not behaving according to the script anymore. You're unpredictable. You're asking strange questions. You're not as invested in the dramas that used to consume you. You're less bothered by the things that used to trigger you. And paradoxically, you're more bothered by the pretense, the performance, the endless game playing that social life requires. So relationships become strained. Because you see, relationships are typically built on mutual agreement about who each person is. You play husband, I'll play wife. You play boss, I'll play employee. You play the successful one, I'll play the struggling one. It's all very organized. But when one person drops their character, the whole production falls apart. The other actors don't know their lines anymore. They don't know how to relate to this new you who isn't playing the game. And this is painful, because you care about these people. You don't want to disrupt their lives. You don't want to be difficult. But you also can't maintain the lie anymore. You can't keep pretending to be someone you're not. And so there's this terrible tension between authenticity and social harmony, between truth and kindness, between your own growth and other people's comfort. Now, here's something fascinating. The universe seems to arrange things so that this transition is as uncomfortable as possible, almost as if it's testing you. Jobs fall apart. Relationships end. Old friendships fade. The structures that held your life together start to collapse. And you might think, well, this spiritual awakening business is ruining everything. And in a sense, it is. It's ruining everything that was false, everything that was based on a mistaken identity, everything that required you to be smaller than you actually are. But while it's ruining these things, it's also making space for something more authentic to emerge, space for relationships based on truth rather than role-playing, space for work that expresses your actual nature rather than your conditioned self, space for a life that flows from being rather than from becoming. The pain, you see, is the pain of expansion, of growing beyond the boundaries you thought defined you. It's the pain of the seed breaking open so the plant can emerge. And if the seed could speak, it would probably say, "Good Lord, I'm falling apart. I'm being destroyed." And it would be right. The seed is being destroyed, but only so that the tree can grow. This is what's happening to you. Your old identity, that carefully constructed, socially acceptable, predictable version of yourself, it's being destroyed. Not because there's anything wrong with it, not because you did anything wrong by having it, but because it's simply too small for what you're becoming. It's like a child's clothes that no longer fit, and you're being asked to grow into your actual size. Now, the mind doesn't like this one bit. The mind's job is to maintain continuity, to create a stable sense of self, to protect you from threats. And from the mind's perspective, this dissolution of identity is the ultimate threat. If I'm not who I thought I was, the mind asks, then who am I? And if I don't know who I am, how will I survive? How will I make decisions? How will I know what to do? These are fair questions, terrifying questions, questions that have no satisfactory answers at the level of the mind that's asking them. Because you see, the whole question, who am I, is based on a misunderstanding. There is no separate who. There never was. There's only this eternal present, this flowing reality, this cosmic dance playing all the parts simultaneously. You're not a separate character who needs to figure out their identity. You're the whole play, temporarily convinced you're just one actor. But try telling that to someone in the middle of an identity crisis. Try telling someone whose entire world is falling apart that actually they're the whole universe and everything's fine. They'll think you've lost your mind. And maybe you have. Maybe losing your mind is precisely what's required, because it's the mind that created the false identity in the first place. It's the mind that bought into the story. It's the mind that's now in pain because the story is being revealed as fiction. Let me tell you something else about this process. It comes in waves. It's not a steady progression from ignorance to enlightenment. No, it's more like the tide. One day you're absolutely certain that you've seen through the illusion. You feel spacious, free, unburdened by the old identity. You move through the world with a kind of ease you've never experienced before, and you think, this is it. I've arrived. I've transcended the ego. And then the next day, you wake up and you're right back in it. The old patterns reassert themselves. The familiar anxieties return. You find yourself defending opinions you thought you'd let go of, playing roles you thought you'd outgrown, worrying about outcomes you thought you'd stopped caring about, and you feel like a fraud, like you haven't made any progress at all, like all that insight was just another illusion. But you see, this is part of the process too. The ego doesn't die in one dramatic moment. It's more like it flickers, on and off, present and absent. Sometimes you're identified with it, sometimes you're not. And gradually, over time, the periods of non-identification become longer. The moments of clarity become more frequent. The old identity loosens its grip, bit by bit, like a fist slowly opening. And during this flickering phase, you're living in two worlds simultaneously. Part of you knows the truth that you're not this separate self, that it's all a game, that you're the ocean pretending to be a wave. But another part of you is still deeply invested in the character, still playing the role, still concerned about what people think and whether you're succeeding and what's going to happen next. This dual existence is maddening, because you can't quite commit to either world. You can't go back to full identification with the character you've seen too much. But you can't quite rest in the spaciousness of no identity either. The conditioning is too strong, the habits too ingrained, the pull of the familiar too powerful. So you are stuck in this in-between place. And it's uncomfortable, like wearing shoes that are too small but refusing to take them off because you're afraid your feet will get cold. You know, the shoes need to go. You can feel how they're cramping your movement. But there's still this fear. What if I need these shoes? What if I can't walk without them? What if this discomfort is all I have to protect me from something worse? And here's where the real teaching comes in. Because this discomfort, this pain of transition, this awkward phase of not quite old self and not quite new self, this is where the transformation actually happens. Not in some dramatic moment of enlightenment, not in some peak experience where everything becomes clear, but here, in the mess, in the uncertainty, in the daily practice of loosening your grip on who you thought you were. It's like learning to swim. You can't learn to swim by standing on the shore reading books about swimming. You can't learn to swim by watching others swim. You have to get in the water. And when you first get in, it's uncomfortable. The water's cold. You're not sure you can trust it to hold you. Every instinct tells you to grasp, to struggle, to try to control. But the paradox is that the more you struggle, the more you sink. The only way to float is to relax, to let go, to trust the water. This is what you're being asked to do with your old identity. Let go. Stop struggling to maintain it. Stop trying to control who you are and how you're perceived and what's going to happen. Just relax into the not knowing, float in the uncertainty. Trust that the universe that's been holding you all along will continue to hold you, even without the safety of a fixed identity. But the mind resists this. The mind wants guarantees. It wants to know what's going to happen if you let go of your identity. Who will you be? How will you function? What will people think? And the answer is, you don't know. You can't know. Not from here, not from the level of mind that's asking the question. The only way to find out is to take the leap, to release the old identity and discover what remains. And what remains, I can tell you, is not nothing. When the old identity dissolves, you don't disappear. You don't become some blank void of non-existence. What remains is what you've always been, this aware presence, this consciousness, this eternal now that's been here all along, hidden beneath the layers of conditioning and story and self-image. But here's the thing. That aware presence doesn't have a shape. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't have a history or a future. It just is. And for a mind that's spent decades defining itself through shapes and names and histories, this shapelessness is deeply unsettling. It feels like death. And in a way, it is death. The death of the false self, the death of the character, the death of the story. But it's also birth. The birth of authenticity, the birth of freedom, the birth of a life that flows from being rather than from becoming, a life that doesn't need constant maintenance and defense, a life that doesn't depend on others confirming your identity, a life that moves with change rather than resisting it. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This process of growing beyond your old identity, it's not something you do. You can't make it happen. You can't force yourself to let go of your ego through sheer willpower. That's just the ego trying to get rid of the ego. which is a delicious paradox, but not particularly helpful. What you can do is notice. Notice when you're identified with the character. Notice when you're playing the role. Notice when you're defending the image. Notice when you're trying to be someone. And in that noticing, something shifts. Not dramatically, not permanently, but shifts nonetheless. Because the very act of noticing creates a little space between you and the identity. A little gap where the light can get in. And that gap, that space, that's where the transformation happens. Not through effort, not through struggle, but through awareness, through seeing, through recognizing the game for what it is. And the more you see it, the less seriously you take it. The less seriously you take it, the lighter you become. The lighter you become, the less you suffer from the changes and losses that are part of growing beyond your old self. You begin to see that all these roles you've been playing, the successful one, the wounded one, the spiritual one, the cynical one, they're all just masks. Temporary performances in the theater of life. And you can wear them when they're useful, put them down when they're not. You don't have to identify with any of them. You don't have to defend any of them. You don't have to maintain any of them. This is freedom. Not the freedom to be whoever you want to be. That's just another story, another becoming. But the freedom to be nothing in particular. To move through life without the burden of a fixed self. To respond to each moment fresh, without dragging along the whole history of me and my story and who I am. And when you live this way, something remarkable happens. The pain of losing your old identity transforms into the joy of discovering your true nature. The discomfort of not knowing who you are becomes the freedom of not needing to know. The terror of uncertainty becomes the adventure of the unknown. What felt like death reveals itself as life fuller, richer, more immediate than anything you experienced while imprisoned in the old identity. But I won't lie to you. The journey there is uncomfortable. It requires you to give up everything you thought you knew about yourself. It requires you to walk through the fire of uncertainty, to sit in the discomfort of not knowing, to allow the old structures to collapse without rushing to rebuild new ones. It requires a kind of courage that has nothing to do with being brave in the ordinary sense. It's more like the courage to be vulnerable, to be open, to be willing to not have it all figured out. And here's the beautiful part. You don't have to do this perfectly. You don't have to let go of your old identity completely and forever in one decisive moment. You just have to be willing to stay with the discomfort, to keep noticing, to keep questioning, to keep loosening your grip, even when every instinct tells you to hold on tighter, because gradually, naturally, effortlessly, the old identity will fall away. Not because you made it fall away, but because it was never real to begin with. It was always just a story, a performance, a dream. And when you wake up from a dream, you don't have to try to stop dreaming. You just open your eyes, and the dream dissolves on its own. So, yes, it hurts to grow beyond your old identity. It's meant to. It's the pain of birth, the pain of transformation, the pain of consciousness recognizing itself. But it's also the most natural thing in the world. Like the pain of shedding skin you've outgrown, like the pain of muscles being stretched and strengthened, like the pain of light entering eyes that have been in darkness. And on the other side of this pain, not some permanent state of bliss or enlightenment, but something much better, the freedom to be, the ease of not having to maintain an image, the relief of not pretending anymore, the joy of moving through life without the burden of a false self, the wonder of discovering that you're not who you thought you were, you're so much more. You're the ocean itself, playing at being waves. You're the eternal now, dancing as time. You're the universe, waking up to itself through these eyes, this body, this moment. You're not losing yourself. You're finding what you've always been. And that finding requires the losing, the dying of what you thought you were so that what you actually are can be recognized. This is it. This is the process. And you, whatever you are doing just fine, better than fine. You're doing exactly what consciousness does when it's ready to recognize itself. You're growing, expanding, awakening. And yes, it hurts, but it's the most beautiful hurt there is.